Hello.
5 minutes in. We're going to call the meeting to order, the second meeting. Charter Commission, I'll hand the reins over to our chair when she's here. First order of business is welcome everybody, those online and those in the room. We'll do a roll call attendance.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. So when I say your name, please say that you are present or here. Commissioner Crosland? Here. Commissioner Dwight?
Here.
Commissioner Garth?
Here.
Commissioner Grant?
Present.
Commissioner Intragliata?
Here.
Commissioner Riley? Vice Chair Sheridan?
Here.
And then we will also go into those who are also present as well. So when I say your name, please say present or here. The Honorable Darlene Green. The Honorable Joseph Gomer. Director Casey Milberg.
Director Milberg has notified my office that she is not going to be here this evening.
Director Christine Ingracia.
Present.
City Councilor Sheena Hamilton.
Present.
Director
Present.
and Mr. Jake Hummel.
And just for the record, Chair Nolan Eccles is here, and so I will be handing the reins over to her.
You sure?
Your meeting.
I'm supposed to acknowledge myself
Oh, sorry.
as well. I'm here.
Vice Chair, if you don't mind continuing the order of the meeting.
Certainly. The next order of business on the agenda is the swearing in of commissioners by the city registrar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Amber Boykin Sims, the city registrar. You're about to take your official oath of office. What will happen is you will raise your right hand. I will say aye. You will say aye. You will state your name, and then you repeat after me. Please stand. Please raise your right hand. I,
Travis Dwight.
Alan Eccles.
now repeat after me. Having been appointed by
Having been appointed by
Mayor Tashara O. Jones,
Mayor Tashara O. Jones.
approved by
Approved by
the city of St. Louis,
the City of St. Louis.
to the office of
To the office of
St. Louis Charter Commission
St. Louis
Charter Commission
for the city of St. Louis,
of the City of St. Louis.
do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I have all the qualifications
all the qualifications
and am
and am
not subject to
not subject to
any of the disqualifications
any of the disqualifications
named in the charter
named in the charter
for the office
or the office
or employment
or employment
I'm about to assume,
I'm about to assume
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution
the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and of this state,
and of this state,
and the charter and ordinances
and the charter and
of the
ordinances
city,
of the city,
that I will be
that I will be
influenced only by
influenced only by
the consideration of fitness
the consideration of fitness
in the appointment,
in the appointment,
promotion,
promotion,
demotion,
demotion,
suspension, or discharge
or discharge
of officers
of officers
or employees,
or employees,
that I will not
that I will not
expend nor authorize
expend nor authorize
the expenditure of money
the expenditure of money
otherwise
otherwise than
for the adequate consideration
for the adequate consideration
efficient service
and efficient service
to the city,
to the city,
and will faithfully discharge
and will faithfully discharge
the duties of my office
the duties of my office
or employment.
or employment.
Congratulations on behalf of the citizens of the city of St. Louis. Thank you for your service. Now I'm going to ask that you come to the table here and affix your official signature to your official oath page. And we will start with Ms. Bowman.
official things I need to send you that I drafted, but you'll see.
There's, oh, thank you.
Where is the event? Okay.
I think it has to be one at a time.
My own.
Take mine, take mine.
I just got here.
Switch it up.
I know, right? Paperwork. What's going on? I have arrived. I know, right? Okay, see how I can get there in 30 minutes.
Thank you everyone for doing the official signature to the official oath page. This concludes the ceremony. Thank you again for your service to the city of St. Louis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quickly, before we proceed, I also want to acknowledge that Commissioner Riley is also present for the record.
Our next agenda item is regarding our prior meeting minutes. I now recognize Secretary Bobo again for a motion regarding approval of the August 30th meeting minutes.
Hello, everyone. You should have received the previous meeting minutes. I hope that you have reviewed them. So now I will quickly hold time for a motion to approve the previous minutes.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay.
Okay, it has been moved and properly second that the August 30th, 2023 meeting minutes are approved. And discussion or corrections to those minutes? Did everybody receive them?
Yes.
All in favor of approving the August 30th, 2023 meeting minutes as presented or amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please say nay. The motion carries with all 9 members The next item on the agenda is the Sunshine Law Training. In doing so, for this portion of the meeting, we welcome Associate City Councilor Barbara. I'm gonna say last name B. I will now entertain a motion that this meeting is closed and that all records and votes, to the extent permitted by law pertaining to or resulting from this closed meeting session, be closed under Missouri Revision Statute Section 610.021, subsection 1, for the purpose of receiving legal advice.
So moved.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
my name is Jerry Connolly, and I'm Chair of fellow commissions. On behalf of St. Louis residents, I object to the closure of this meeting under item 4. The Missouri Sunshine Act states that all public body meetings are open unless a specific exception applies. Closing the meeting for training on the Sunshine Act cannot possibly be attorney-client privilege, since the terms of the Missouri Sunshine Statute are public record and speak for themselves. There's no litigation or other proceedings pending requiring advice of counsel to the best of my knowledge. Therefore, no valid reason exists to close that portion of the meeting. I'd like this objection to be entered into the permanent record, and I've got copies here for. I don't think I've got enough to go around.
Thank you. Would our city councilor's office like to respond?
Hi, Jerry. You can proceed to a vote.
So would we like to read what is being passed out to us in order to take a vote?
I am curious, Madam Chair and City Councilor, as to why this does need to be in closed session.
So I don't give legal advice generally in the public. Legal advice that we give to the board is typically in a closed session. We have done it with many other commissions, the Ferguson Commission most recently, and many other boards and commissions for the city of St. Louis. So, but you all are obviously free to vote how you choose.
But this training is considered legal advice then?
I do consider it legal advice.
Thank you.
Any other questions or positions related to what's being discussed currently? Okay. Do we have a motion for whether or not we do the Sunshine Law training in a closed session or in a public meeting forum?
So I move that we move forward with a closed session for this training.
It has been properly moved and seconded for all of us that are opposed, or no, I'm sorry, for all of us that are in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
For all of us that are opposed, say nay.
Hey, do we need to do this as a roll call vote?
We need to do a roll
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay. So Secretary Bobo, if you could do a roll call vote for this section, please.
call. Commissioner Crossland? Commissioner Dwight?
Nay. Those, I think Dwight, great. You say great.
Yeah, you're a name.
Oh, yeah, I understand. I understand that, Tatum, I think. Aye.
Commissioner Garth?
Aye.
Commissioner Grant?
Nay.
Commissioner Intagliata?
Aye.
Commissioner Nolan Eccles?
Aye.
Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
Commissioner Sheridan?
Nay.
And myself, aye.
Secretary Bobo, can we get a count for that, please?
Sure. We have 7 in favor, 2 opposed.
With the majority of votes being 7, that means we move to have a closed Sunshine Law training, and we will resume the public meeting after the training. Great. Our next agenda item is a discussion of approach to our work. Commissioner Dwight has agreed to share an overview of Ferguson Playbook as a potential approach. I now recognize Commissioner Dwight.
Thank you. So, thanks for inviting a sharing of more about the Ferguson Commission's process. So I have some copies for everyone here, and it can also be found easily online by simply Googling Ferguson Commission Playbook, and it's readily accessible on the Ferguson website. But I have a couple extra as well for any members of the public that may want to be copied. So the Ferguson Commission was given a pretty astronomical charge when it came together, not only to look into, to actually not look into what happened on that day with the killing of Michael Brown by the officer Darren Wilson, but to look into underlying root causes, policies, practices that created a system where that happened so routinely. So it looked really broadly, kind of similar to this body has to do, at everything from education to municipal governance to transportation to taxing to everything across. And so with that large of a charge, as well as it being an item of incredible public interest and trauma and pain around systemic racism, the team that was originally brought together to think about the process really wanted to think really intentionally about how to approach it. They really tried to be a student of past processes, both in St. Louis and across the country, to understand what it really meant to go above and beyond, because one of the biggest learnings of the Ferguson Commission is that process is product when it comes to things that involve community and governance and public process. So they really wanted to make sure that the values that they hoped to be embodied in the end product and those outcomes were also embodied in the way that they actually went about their business. And so this document is broken up into a set of commitments that kind of define, looking back, how they sought to build that into the process and how that succeeded then in the Ferguson Commission report. So the first part of it is about building the team, and that really just speaks to making sure that you have the resources set up to actually if you're trying to live into transparency, community accountability, live into equity, all of these principles, that you actually then lean into the infrastructure that it takes to do that, which I'm thankful it seems like we really do in terms of the staffing necessary to put this on, the media that's necessary in order for it to truly be accessible to the public and for things to be documented and recorded and available to the public. So that's what that Build a Team Prepared for the Challenge speaks to. Then they really operated based off of core values, like adopting those. And I'll go into those commitments more deeply later. But if you turn to page 5 and 6, this speaks about the scale and then the process that the Ferguson Commission undertook. No doubt going to be larger than the scale of what we're going to do. And still, I think demonstrates, again, that above and beyond. So in terms of the commitment to transparency and to Sunshine Law, they really made sure that the way that they approached it, that working group meetings were all open to the public. Materials that experts that were brought forward to provide information, that those were publicly posted as well. And so you'll see that across the many working group meetings that they had, how they approached the commission meetings, and who they engaged in it. They even went so far as to, on the working groups, have people that weren't explicitly on the commission engaged in the process, just to spread out and include more wisdom and partnerships across the region in what they were creating. That's actually something that the Stimulus Advisory Committee that the mayor, Tashara Jones, created a couple years ago with all of the federal money that was coming down. Some of those sub-working groups did invite other, for example, data experts to come and be a part of that process to just like buttress and support and provide more infrastructure for them. So then there's the Ferguson Commission roadmap that explains the process. There's a lot of segments, but I'm going to kind of simplify it into kind of sections of what they did. So first was this like getting clear on the charge, and for their case, an executive order, for our case, an ordinance, and then getting clear on their priorities and forming work groups. So this first whole part is just clarity on charge and clarity on structure for how they would do that. In the further developing commission priorities, that was composed of both discussion of the commission, looking at history, but then also public testimony and surveying. So they did a series of public surveys that didn't seek to get exact, like, this is what's most important or this is what's least important, but this is the range of issues that the public is interested in. The commissioners took that into consideration along with their thoughts, and that's how they decided the work groups in that case. And those work groups were formed. Those work groups, again, in that case, did include additional community members, but those work groups were open to the public as well. Once they were given a clear charge, then got deep into that work, they decided if they wanted to have people come to it. That was kind of a decision of the work group. And meanwhile, as the work group was working through their area of focus, the commission itself might actually focus in on a certain topic during the broader discussion. Like there was one commission meeting that was dedicated to youth voice and the role that played in their charge and what they were looking towards. So they kind of used that like dual level to get through all the information that they needed to work through. The work groups would then have a process for, after they had gone deep into a kind of issue, proposing or coming together on the actual call to action. The commission produced policy recommendations. So they would bring those policy recommendations together, vote on them as a group to then submit them towards the final commission, where the commission would then consider it. The commission, if they came up with some issues, might send it back to the work group, or they might have public comment that came up and introduced some new information in it. So there was kind of a iterative process to get towards that final piece of it. So this is kind of, that whole section right here in the middle is part 2. As they got then to phase 3, all the work groups needed to, by a certain deadline, have submitted everything, and for it to be actually fully processed by the full commission, and decide what the slate of things that would move forward on. And then there was kind of a prioritization or like a deliberation process. Is this based on research fully? Do some of these things affect each other? Are there unintended consequences once you have the final slate? And then that was submitted forward as going live. And then there was that final piece of it, which was that kind of closing out, making sure it's publicly available, and then we have a whole set of things that we're obligated to do. But that's how the Ferguson Commission process could inform this one. And then I won't go too deep into every commitment, just kind of, if you'll indulge me to go like one by one. On page 8 is that build the team prepared for the challenge. I already spoke to that one. Operate off of core values. This again was that process as product. Let's really lean into transparency and public accountability and to being authentic. The commission raised a variety of issues that had huge implications for legal structures, elected officials, the way that St. Louis is built, but that it was important to have those conversations as publicly, to lean into that discomfort of it, and to hear all viewpoints aligned to those values to then get towards a solution. So that's a set of it. Commitment 3 is about the process of innovation. That was just leaning into the fact, again, for the commission, a pretty unprecedented thing that they had to do. For us too, we're taking on a charge that hasn't been done in the city of St. Louis for over 100 years. And so we're going to be considering some pretty huge innovative changes to with the way city is structured. So just leaning into that discovery and discernment and understanding that it's going to be iterative and not holding ourselves back by thinking we have to get it perfect immediately, but that we can keep improving. And there's a framework for change for how they thought about that innovation in here on page 12. On page 14, commitment 4 is space for the healing process to begin. I think for the commission, a little bit more than the charter necessarily, they were really talking about like experiences of racism and systemic racism deeply. So that was maybe a little more charged than this. And still, we might be considering departments that had huge effects on people's daily lives. So just understanding that people are going to show up in all kinds of ways from the public, but sometimes that's by way of frustrations, stress that they've had to endure in their life because of this. So just taking it with a healing mentality in that. 5 is around commitment to advancing racial equity. So this was just understanding that systemic racism is bedrock in the U.S. And so it informs basically every area of life when you look at outcome measures for people. So it was important for the commission to take that seriously in every issue that they looked at. And so they practically did that in some ways. Like when they considered a policy recommendation, they actually had a little rubric that said like, will this disproportionately affect people based off identity or based off race? Like just as an active way of considering that. And I would actually propose that being part of like our rubric when we're considering changes to the charter, that kind of disproportionate impact and equity considerations. 6 was leveraging existing expertise. So that was just really thinking broadly about expertise, not just meaning people with PhDs or people with very traditional credentials, but also thinking about people's lived experience across time being just as important of a type of expertise for the Ferguson Commission to consider, and to try and be an honest broker in considering that experience and to, as much as possible, get the diversity of experience needed to make good decisions, and to understand that there's a lot of that expertise across the region that we can tap into. 7, that design and network of strategic partnerships. Again, thinking systemically. Similarly to this commission, they were focused on policy and systems. Everything in the charter is a policy or a system. So just thinking about that complexly, things interact, and that partnership was really the only way to consider something so deep and broad. So just leaning into the variety of partnerships we could across the region or nation to support us in this, which we've all, already been in that first meeting supplied with some resources across the country like that. And then 8, just engagement through innovative communication. So just really leaning into not just saying, but doing, not just doing, but saying when it came to those commitments around public engagement. And that's where they leaned into, they might have a forum that was, all dedicated to community engagement, but even at every meeting, they would have some space for, testimony if anybody did want to say anything, even if it was a limited part of it, and then making sure that it was accessible digitally. So that's the overview of the Ferguson Commission playbook in a nutshell. Any questions, thoughts on that from the commission?
That's the approach, not policy yet.
Totally, just on the Ferguson
Any
Commission.
discussion on the approach?
Okay, thanks for doing this. If you were to go back and do it again, I'm sure it was, an important bit of work and you should be justly proud of it. How would you improve it? And what didn't work as well?
I think the commission definitely learned things across time. So some things contained in this playbook are not necessarily what they knew at the beginning and also reflect like improvements of the process across it towards the end of it. I think space at the end for consideration of what's generated is super important, and the commission actually got really down to the wire in that space because some work groups submitted their ideas pretty late in the process or behind schedule, and that meant a real crunch at the end to really like prioritize and consider and think about interactions. So I think that's one thing that would be done differently in like process, like really saving that time at the end.
Specific timeframe before finalization would you recommend for people to marinate and consider?
So the commission was created in November of 2014 and had its first meeting in December of 2014. And it had to submit the final report to the state by September of 2015. So they had about 10 months, 10 or 11 months, so actually about our timescale too. They spent December, January, and part of February deciding the scope, how they would structure it, what was the most important places to focus in on. February through May-ish was the get into the work, hear testimony, bring expertise to the work groups and to the larger group, have forums, and get us those final recommendations by like June. Some of the work groups, especially the education one, didn't get it until a little bit later, like stretching into July and such, which really didn't give, then there were only 2 public commission meetings, and it was really down to the wire, still accepting some things up to that last meeting before things had to be finalized and then submitted out in September. So I think that's where only having like 1 or 2 meetings at the end just wasn't enough to really have a considerate, like considerable process.
Have enough meetings because you could only have one a month or something?
The commission had 1 larger meeting a month of the full body, and then work groups would meet once a month, additionally to the large group.
To that point though, to be really specific, you could have had extra meetings, right?
For the commission process,
Or are you saying we should have had more meetings, or are you saying it should have all been done by Memorial Day?
oh yeah, when everybody submitted should have been earlier.
Okay.
Is what I'm saying.
And so you're saying it should have been 90 days before finality, I think if I'm getting your timeline. So if we were to transfer that to our timeline, if somebody could, we're supposed to submit something
End of August.
in August or July, right? Is it August?
Beginning
Okay,
of
so, and is that the end of August or the beginning?
I think it's the middle of August.
Actually, the end of August.
Oh, end.
The issue is that our meetings are the first week in August. So we have that first meeting in August to make our finals. So
So then if you were to back that up 3 months, it'd be July, June, May, so we'd be submitting things at the end of April.
But I
We would use the 90
As a
day.
framework.
As a framework, though, I think we have more flexibility than I think the Ferguson Commission did, where I think we can have
More meetings.
more meetings or, in a way that I don't think the Ferguson Commission could.
I think they had a lot of meetings though, based on the work numbers.
They did.
I think there was a lot of meetings still for the year in which it was operating. So,
It was a deep charge, yeah. And so, yeah, I don't think I would necessarily recommend that they did more meeting than they did, which was quite a bit. I mean, 19 commission meetings and 38 work group meetings they had, so that was a significant amount of public meetings. And there's work in between that has to happen to consider things, so, yeah.
any other feedback or discussion?
It strikes me, thinking about differences between the Ferguson Commission and what they were charged to do and what we're being charged to do here. that there is another difference, if you want to call it that. And that is that we're being asked to recommend ways to update, to streamline, to create flexibility, et cetera, within government. And that while we see that then as our charge, there are people in the community for whom working for government is their daily lives. And so they may view this differently than us. There may be quite natural fear and concern about what's happening, and we need to be sensitive to that because this is their livelihood. We're talking about numbers and streamlining, and they're talking about their livelihoods. And so that is a very, I think, something we need to be conscious of during this whole process. That's I think something that we have to, and the second part of it then, over and above the individuals themselves, is that this very well could create a shift in whatever the power base of the community is and government. And how that plays out in the middle of all of it, nobody knows now versus later. But these are just things we have to be aware of because it isn't just the words, in the ballot change at that point or in the charter, but it is the document that basically operates our city at this point, and that's gonna that is something we shouldn't just not be aware of and consider as part of all this.
We have discussion? Are we okay with, is there any motion that we need to put on the floor related to the approach? Or are we okay with moving on with the next agenda item?
Move forward.
All right. I think. Because we'll have to discuss and determine and really iron out approach. I think this is a good framework to reference. As we know, it's very different from what we'll be doing, but we can revisit. I'm sure it'll come up again in the next agenda item related to the policy and the process that we're going to apply to this, so we can make reference to it in the next agenda item. So our next agenda item is the formation of working groups. And I can lead the discussion in this area as over this past week, my ideal with the group creation from last meeting was, it wasn't any strategic means of grouping each other for particular articles or for particular work or recommendation. It was really just to evenly distribute the 9 of us into groups of 3, where we'd concentrate on an undetermined amount of articles. And the reason for that being is so that everyone has a part and or a participatory angle with different articles that are solving or addressing different issues versus coupling us all based on, backgrounds, or what we said was basic means of education or expertise, and just removing those items and just separating us based on number and not on background or on expertise or on our desired concentration. So the formulation of work groups I did literally just based on what I explained, and I separated the articles in my head and on paper, which I shared with the city council, in just, I think, 8, and 9, because there's 26, and no particular order or no particular commissioners. Does that make sense?
It does.
Is there any discussion on how we should create or formulate, or what the formation of our work groups should be for this work?
I do have a recommendation. So, ma'am, let's see.
Yes.
So I thought of 3 groups as well. One being the roles and relationship between the mayor's office, Board of Aldermen, and the courts, as those three bodies. The second group looking at the services provided to the city citizens, parks, et cetera. And then lastly, the rights of citizens, i.e. elections and the like. So those three branches of government as one group, services we provide to citizens as the second, and then third, the rights of citizens in the city.
Are you speaking to groups of the articles or groups of the commissioners that we should
Groups of
be
the
bringing
articles,
into?
so it may not be evenly divided, but it gives a concentration focus to each group.
Do you mind saying the articles that would go in those three buckets?
Sure, Commissioner White. So I'm looking at the charter, page 1, and please feel free to jump in here.
Yeah.
If there were a group on the three bodies, the mayor's office is Article 7. Board of Aldermen, Article 4. City Courts, Article 12. I'm doing this on the spot now, so please feel free to jump.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Would anyone add a group based upon how I described what that working group would consist of?
It was mayor, BOA, and courts were the three groups?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you give us the three buckets again, so as you're listing them, we can,
Yes.
what was B or the second one?
So the first bucket is the role relationship of the three branches of government.
Yeah.
B of A, mayor's office, courts. The second bucket are the services provided to St. Louis's citizens. So for example, Article 13, Board of Public Service, Article 14, Art Museum, Zoo. The third bucket, the rights of our citizens, elections, and et cetera. As an example, Article 2. Yes.
What was C?
Where would the Department of Finance and the Board of DNA fall?
That would mostly, I would believe, fall under government, because Board of DNA consists of the mayor.
Right, so I'm thinking it needs to be part of that group that he
The first one,
mentioned.
first
That's
group.
what I'm saying.
Okay.
And the DNA itself would need to be part of that first group.
I kind of had written it, I have taken those three buckets and kind of just called it like A for government, B for public service, C for citizen or civil rights.
Okay. So based upon, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, just basically taking your same idea and just kind of just shortening it to like, okay, so like group A would be government, B would be anything involving public service, and then C, citizen or civil rights.
So we're just gonna go one by one down the, okay. Article 1, incorporation. Where would that?
Incorporation, you're incorporating the actual charter, so therefore you could argue that could fall under government, but it could also fall under rights of the citizens.
Articles could also be pertinent to multiple bodies.
Correct.
Right.
So there may be some overlap too.
I like this idea. I mean, I like these buckets that you've identified, and I think it would be, because of that overlap, it might be helpful for people to go into those buckets and then look at the charter through that lens and see how their working groups might, because there's going to be crossover in almost every area. But I like that as an ordering device.
Yeah, it makes sense. My one concern about just dividing by, 8 and 9 or whatever is that the articles themselves are of different length and impact, and it may not be equitable, even though if on the face of it, it looks like it is. And so the idea of relationships to some of them makes a bit more sense to me.
So the issue I have with grouping and bucketing and even the relationship of certain articles is I think I over-reviewed the sunshine law requirements and what can occur and what has occurred historically in some of these efforts related to city charter reform and city charter efforts. When you have specific people concentrated on specific buckets and specific groups of things, we come up across a lot of different issues and vulnerabilities that I would like us to avoid when we have specific commissioners assigned to a specific group or bucket of articles. And in that case, it produces some vulnerabilities for me. So, for example, to give an example, if we have one commissioner working specifically on the articles associated to the mayor, the vulnerabilities it presents for that commissioner to make amendments pertaining to that article without any other commissioner approach, reproach, recommendations, perspective, contribution to it. That's more so where I was coming from with the omittance of bucketing articles into groups of things and assigning specific commissioners to those.
I think Commissioner Riley's recommendation actually helps accomplish that, because then one person wouldn't be looking at let's say I'm in Group B, services to the citizens or public service. I might look at Article 7 about the mayor through that lens, but another group that's looking at rights of citizens or civil rights might look at the article of the mayor through a different lens. So in essence, each commissioner isn't just taking a subsection of the charter, but they're looking at the charter through 3 different lenses. Did I understand is that how you were describing it, essentially?
That's a possibility.
That's a possibility, okay.
I'm thinking it out loud, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I like that aspect of it, of the idea of looking through lenses like that.
To the angle of lenses, can we discuss what lenses we would be looking at these buckets through? Each commissioner communicating what lenses we have to look through. And I'll give an example. I had discussion earlier related to the academic lens that we see to happen a lot, especially with some of these initiatives where the lens that is looked through is that of an academic lens. Do we have versatile lenses that we're looking at these articles through as it relates to deciding on whether or not the bucket approach is the appropriate approach?
I think I'd maybe offer that there's 2 things that are maybe there. Like, one is bucketing to understand how the different articles work together in the functioning of government. And then I like what you just brought up there, which is kind of like, then in every bucket, how do we look at it? Like, we can look at it from an academic sense. You could look at it from a like interaction with the public. Like, you could look at it through a transparency. Like, so for me, those are kind of like 2 different pieces.
I think those are things that we have to be mindful of, because when we bucket them, different buckets require a specific or particular lens. It requires you to have certain knowledge bases and capabilities and abilities to navigate the work of that bucket. So then we have to look into, do we assign a random subset of commissioners to a particular bucket if you have to have the skill set or capability to navigate the articles assigned to that bucket. So that is why I was recommending not bucketing. But I understand the need for the articles to be bucketed in order for us to begin work, because I'm also not wanting us to extend or come to a crunch with the timeline. So bucketing, I think, is appropriate and fine, but then we have to look at the lenses and who's able to appropriately, actively, and effectively, adding another word, efficiently, approach that bucket of articles.
I see where both sides of the discussion have some opportunities in them. I would suggest that each of us that are on the committee, on the commission, either know enough that we could be a member of a subcommittee a work group that dealt with 8 of these, just arbitrarily or a bucket. And if it required additional learnings to be able to sharpen our skills a bit, that would be something that we could do so that we could get there. In terms of us, then perhaps being a little bit more singled out or whatever because we were assigned to a specific bucket or category or whatever, all we're going to be doing in these working groups are developing some themes and different kinds of discussion pieces that I would think then that as a group we would really deal with later. And so it wouldn't necessarily be
No,
that
we are doing more than discussion.
Yeah.
Madam-
But decisions are going to be made by the commission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, may I be recognized?
Yes, ma'am. I can't see your name because of the tag. Okay, we'll listen to Director Gray right now.
Director Jenkins Gray.
Thank you.
Just a thought and observation for consideration of the commission. As I'm listening and you're going through trying to determine and define the buckets, which makes a lot of sense. The only thing that I'd like to add to that for your consideration is that before you can before you can really effectively determine the buckets, that maybe understanding the operations of the city and how the city operates, and then be able to determine based off of that where your direction should go with assignment of buckets, because the way that our city operates is much different than most cities, only for consideration.
We requested the organizational charts on last meeting to have that information so that we can make those determining factors. Will we able to get that information?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we got the org chart, and I think on our October meeting, I think we are getting a briefing about the city structure as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to specifically ask, in that briefing, by department, number of employees and budget for each department. So,
I would like to add and it may be lengthy, but any available policies or procedures or processes for those departments in those charts would help us greatly as well, in addition to the organizational chart.
And my question, having looked at the charter, is that it's very clear that there are parts of it that must have been changed over the years that aren't actually changed in the charter, like the mayor and $5,000 a year worth of salary, et cetera. So there must be additional documents over and above the charter that amend parts of it right now that I don't think I have. Is that correct? So what's there is what's there, is that
You have a copy of the complete charter.
I guess then the question is, how do we operate as we operate today? Because not everything that's in the charter is how we operate as a city, correct?
Yeah, yes, that's.
What we have is how we operate, okay? Okay.
Absolutely.
Do we have any more discussion on the approach or the working groups?
yeah, I would like to make a distinct recommendation. No matter what we do and what we come up with, we have a very final place that we have to be, is that whatever we come up with has to go to a vote. And looking back on the history, there's a number of things that have, spiked these things in the past, but it seems that one of the things that particularly spiked them is that you need a 60% approval. And it just seems, on a real practical basis, if that threshold were 50%, it would still be hard to get these passed, but easier than at 60 by definition. And I think that we should examine whether lowering the threshold for the amendments we eventually put on the ballot can, if it's a vote or a ordinance from the Board of Aldermen or whatever procedure we need to take, that we should explore that and see if we can get to a 50% threshold, making it easier to pass whatever we come up with.
Just some thoughts. I'm not sure that that's within
Our
our
purview.
jurisdiction to do, to lower the requirements in order for,
I am sure that there are all sorts of difficulties and impossibilities about it, but I also know that we could explore it and find out exactly what we have to do and see what we could.
what's possible.
Yeah, yes.
Are you recommending that we determine which articles are priority for
No,
amendment?
I'm saying that we should see if we can change the voting
Percentage.
threshold to 50% approval rather than 60% approval. Making
They
our
may have to
task
go for automatic.
much easier.
I do think that's maybe beyond what we have the power to do. My understanding is the ordinance that the board passed is aligned with standard procedure for putting things up to a public vote, which I think always require that 60% isn't the only. I don't know if that's even something that the Board of Aldermen could change.
The initial research is that there are a number of paths that could achieve it. I think that I'd like to get those formally reviewed.
To determine if
You know,
it's
we have lots of lawyers and lots of election specialists. Have them review it and tell us the options. And I would hope everybody would agree that if we could change it to 50, between now and the time that these are voted on, it would make it a lot easier to get them passed.
It would,
I don't,
it would make
Yeah, I
it
don't
easier.
agree.
I think it's helpful to know the answer to the question, so we know what's available to us.
Yes.
I would simply add, though, that having had this process undertaken before and always failed, that having a document or amendments that majority of the city really can get behind would be a strong show of support for what we worked on. And to reach that 60%, perhaps that should be the goal, as opposed to lowering the threshold. So I think we show the answer, yes, but I may disagree on our approach to.
And I think I respect that viewpoint. It's hard to pass anything with a 60% approval. And when you look at the history of voting, St. Louis City or anywhere else, once you get above a 50% threshold, it becomes infinitely harder to do that. So,
I would probably like to, just for that discussion to happen with either both the city councilor and maybe the Board of Aldermen.
yes.
And that way we can kind of get a clear understanding of that, because I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I also understand that I don't want us to go beyond our actual purview, because as we have seen in the past with the city of St. Louis, that there have been some decisions that were made, and all it took was a simple shifting or manipulation of certain numbers or certain, pollings or whatever. So I just like to.
We can ask her. We can put the
Yes.
specific question to Sheena related to the ordinance and the voting percentage. And let's see what she has to say. The floor is yours related to,
I'm pretty sure it's
Oh, she's
in the
gonna-
charter or the state constitution.
because I think this
I think
ordinance
it's
is
in there.
what Sheena's following related to what the percentage threshold has to be. So this may be one of those discussions we have, particularly with her, if that's even available to us, an option to us.
Could, we might be doing the same thing. You go first.
I also want to just underscore that I don't think it should be our approach, or at least my personal ethos is not to make things easier for the sake of making them easier. I think we invite people's opinions in. We invite people to share their hearts and their thoughts. Just because 60% is difficult doesn't mean we should maybe shy away from it. I do understand the concern, but certainly I think it's more important, to Commissioner Riley's point, to really invite people in and get something that the majority can really stand behind. So
I
that's,
thought about that, and I think that you have a really valid point. What I would say, though, to that, is the 60% threshold is in the charter. To some degree, that is our purview to at least explore it. And we decide all sorts of things at a 50% threshold. And I'm wondering why changes to the charter are somehow different than tax issues. I'm having a hard time figuring out why making a change to licensing in the city of St. Louis is that much more important than property tax increases.
I guess the thing I would offer is more just like a process consideration. That sure, it is worthy of discussion and consideration, and we'll all have different opinions on it, and the public will have different opinions, but that's maybe something for a work group meeting to be about, more than necessarily.
I'm going to recommend that we move into the engagement planning piece of the agenda, because that's more of where this discussion falls, related to how we're going to engage the public in order to even get the 40, 50, or 60% votes that we need on amendments. So I recommend that we move to number 7 on the agenda, which is engagement planning. If I can get a motion for.
Before we do
I
that,
just would have one more question.
Go ahead.
Because I would like to just, I'm not saying anything about 50, 60% policy-wise, I think it's a debate, but put that aside. Like, I do think we need to know what we can do and cannot do. So, and I mean,
completely
I
agree.
have some views of what that is, but like, the Missouri Constitution might put some limits on what we can do. So the question I have is, like, when any one particular commissioner has that question, can we direct the city councilor to say, please give us an opinion on whether we have the ability to amend the charter to change the threshold for passing an amendment from 50% from 60 to 50%?
And I think that's what the other commissioners are saying, is we would have to speak with city council to determine if we can do anything related to what's already in the ordinance. And we don't have, to my knowledge, that authority, correct?
And we can give you that legal advice.
Okay.
Well, how should we do that? Like, what's the
She has
process?
to provide us with that legal advice. In order to do that, we don't know that
But how
process.
do we ask her? Like, do we do that as
I'm
an
sitting right
individual?
it's right there.
Yeah, so I think that's maybe a process consideration, just like
Yeah.
our chair is saying,
It's
at
a
many
process
points
consideration.
in this, we're gonna be asking, hey, we think this kind of change to the charter is great. Is that even permissible under state constitution that supersedes it, you know? So maybe I'm wondering if maybe that is part of both community engagement, but then how we run our meetings, how we think about, we'll get into the process
Which is
of
why
how we.
I think it's more of an engagement question, because we have to engage city council in those types of discussions in order to get the answers that we need.
Keep in mind that keep in mind that city council cannot give a public, legal, advisable answer.
That's not true. They could choose to we could choose to make it public. It's just a question of whether we want it to be attorney-client privileged or not.
Yeah, like for example, when the Board of Aldermen is considering a bill and
Yeah.
the counselor gives a legal advice on whether it's permissible, that can be shared.
Yeah.
So
in-
before we move, do we want to decide on the working groups first or move to engagement?
The working groups, do we have a motion on the floor related to working groups?
I thought we were going
I'm-
to look at how the city is run first
The
before.
organizational structure.
Yeah, before we formulate articulated the,
Would we like to wait on the organizational structure documentation to come before putting a motion on the floor related to the buckets, basically?
I believe that's what the recommendation was, at least, and it made sense to me that we hold up at least for a meeting and
But it's the association of assigning the commissioners related to skill set. The buckets, I think, is a separate issue. I think it's two different issues. I think one issue is, do we group the articles? And then the second issue is who's assigned to those groups to amend those articles.
I mean, I think it might be based both off of interest and experience, like who
Once we
goes
have
to
all
what.
of the organizational information. So we're going to table that for the next meeting, once we have all of the organizational structure information.
And the org chart that was requested at the last meeting was distributed on the 5th. What you all would like to see is the departmental org charts with budget and number of employees. Do I have that right?
Budget,
But then-
number of employees, processes as well. Like if they have any process map structure that shows their processes and policies and procedures or things like that, that would be in addition to the org charts.
Some. My understanding of the request from the last meeting for what is happening is right. It's a little bit higher level than necessarily getting into the nitty gritty of every department, which we may need to do. And somebody suggested like bring department heads to testify as related to these things, which it sounds awesome. I wonder if that granular detail might be better at those points. And for the questions that are on the table, which is how do we categorize and where do we start and where we dive in, I wonder if the higher level, which is what I understand Christine is going to give us as well, right? She's on the agenda for next month.
Yeah, and on your letter from the 5th, this org chart was depicting the city and county offices, which was some of the discussion that we had at the last meeting.
Which is what I was hearing Director Gray speak to as well, which is like, how do these departments even work or have dysfunctions together at a high level?
yeah.
Because that might be the buckets that we need to focus on.
My interest, I'm just one of the 9, but my interest is understanding how the departments at a high level really work as opposed to how they're defined in the charter right now.
Correct.
Because they are defined very, very tightly in some cases. There will be 2 deputies, there will be this, there will be whatever. And if we're to better understand what is right and not so right about the charter, we need to understand
How they
what is the
operate.
function that's there right now, and then hear from these directors about how, if they had their druthers, they would make changes to be able to function more efficiently. And then we would be able to, I think, take that information and really distill it and prepare recommendations. So that's my thought at least.
Okay. Do we have any other discussion?
I like what we're saying. My concern is it's already September.
Yes.
And we're talking about our October meeting. And so we're pushing our deadlines back. Is there a way to think ahead what we need for October so we can begin to make recommendations for the work groups no later?
I agree. The recommendation, especially based on the mapping that you've shown us from the commission, if we're using that as a platform, and then your position that crunch time occurred later on in the year, in order to avoid that, getting some of this information on the front end and planning some of these things out, which is why I recommend us moving on to the next phase of the agenda. At this point, discussing timelines and benchmarks and these types of things, because I would prefer and recommend that we don't spend 2 quarters on planning and sourcing this information and navigating through it over having access to it, knowing what we need to know, and moving through the work.
My question is, would it be possible to hold a series of informational discussions with department heads, et cetera, by Zoom over the next month or 6 weeks, to be able to get some of this information so that we can be more prepared at the October meeting to move forward with actually some decisions about bucketing or not, about groups, that kind of stuff. I share your concern that if we wait till October and then start having our presentations and stuff, suddenly we're running into the holidays. And so to the degree that as a group, it seems to me we could do it as a group, by Zoom or whatever, that might be a way for us to be able to have discussions and learn from these individuals, so that we'd have a better sense of how all this stuff fits together.
I think those are reasons we could utilize our special meetings. The necessity for meeting with specific departments, divisions, officials related to specific questions we may have or division perspectives we may have. I think further in the agenda, number 8, we're discussing the special meetings, and I think that we could use special meetings for the case of meeting with different departments, divisions, and officials. And we could vote on that if we could get to engagement and planning. So I'm going to move us on the next piece of our agenda is engagement and planning. And I want to start this conversation with, after my research and looking at everything that was presented to us and everything that I was able to find in academic understanding, communication is the biggest aspect of why this reform or this work related to city charters happen to fail. So in engagement planning, if we're talking about communication being the forefront pillar of how we engage the community and the public, can we discuss ways and means in which we want to communicate with the public on a regular basis related to the process of the work that we're doing? With communication being the priority. So if we're prioritizing communication with the public, which ways we want to plan doing so? We have discussion?
Well, the one thing that we did say earlier that we should bring back is that I think there was an interest in every public meeting asking the public to setting aside time at some portion of the meeting to comment.
Okay, any other discussion on engagement?
Yeah, I really appreciate your idea about communication and where a lot of things fail, because I think especially with it being a ballot measure and 60% usually community campaigns to try and get something on the ballot to be passed have huge education efforts behind them to build awareness and understanding about what the issue is. So I do think us doing that proactively will help to get what we want passed. So something maybe that I would propose is where we can, maybe this won't be till later parts of the process, but if there are themes emerging on areas that we really do want to submit changes on, theming a meeting around that or holding a forum dedicated just to that and advertising it as such really broadly, or really encouraging community partners to advertise it so that there can be like educational things. And I also, if we bring expertise or people in, I wonder if there's ways to catalog that online in a way where we're like building a bank of publicly accessible information. That's why we're suggesting certain changes. Mm-hmm. Because I do think walking alongside with the public will be really important on this.
I want to take it a step further, and I want us to explain to the public why, but also how the changes impact them. Because I think the what and the why can be very dense sometimes.
Yeah.
And the apathy may come in where I don't understand why it matters until I see in the news a discrepancy between police and whatever departments there may be, Board of Aldermen, et cetera. So I think we need to clearly explain why the changes matter to everyday life of the citizen. I think that will encourage engagement, public hearings, et cetera.
Totally.
And my recollection of the last and I mentioned this earlier, the initiative, the recommendations that were made, et cetera, were such that, and not explained, and government employees were not brought into the process. I'm happy to see that this time, there is a group, even though they're non-voting, that are part of the process. And so they were left out of the process that time. And they were, quite frankly, very concerned about some of the recommendations and what came onto the ballot because they knew that it directly affected their jobs. And they, quite frankly, got out and worked real hard in the community then to defeat the ballot measures. And that's something that we have to recognize, is that we are making changes for the good of the community, but we need to bring everybody along. That part of the constituents that we are trying to improve lives for are in fact are people engaged in city government. And if we don't make that case well, then it's going to be all that much harder for us to be able to be successful.
I would like to add to a lot of what I've read was the expert line. The title expert was brought up often and, in my experience, overused as it relates to people that can contribute to this work. And I would just like us not to over-exemplify the expert angle of things as we're trying to actually make the impact on the citizens that may not identify as experts or may not be, to that other word, academic, or these other angles and aspects. Some of our city employees may not fit those buckets. That does not mean they can't contribute to the work that is being done or that has been done for the city of St. Louis. I just need us to be cognizant of some of the requirements of who contributes to the work that we're doing falling only into the bucket of academic or expert. If we don't have any other discussion on engagement planning, then we can move to the next.
Well, I want to add
the
to
agenda.
Commissioner Dwight's point. Do we want to vote on adding a section to each agenda for public comment? Even if it's, we set a time of
Is that a
15 minutes,
motion?
a half an hour, so we know going forward, that's our process.
I would move that at the beginning of every meeting, we ask the public to give them 10 or 15 minutes of our meeting time to give their input.
Try for one amendment that it could be, we can determine what time during the meeting, not necessarily at the beginning.
Okay, great. So in every meeting, we'll have, at some point, we'll have a 10 or 15-minute period where we'll solicit public input.
Love it.
There's my motion.
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Okay. For all of those in favor of the motion on the floor, please say yes or aye.
Aye.
For those of us opposed, say no or nay. Okay. With the majority, minus the vice president that is not here anymore, we have a pass vote on this motion.
Does that start today or in October?
Probably October.
October, because I think we have to give
October.
public notice.
And get notice,
When we
okay.
take
Thank you.
testimony.
Yeah.
Put it on the agenda, got it.
Is there any other motion that we need to put on the floor at this time? You sure?
Fairly sure.
So next on the agenda is the special meetings. I brought up earlier that I think the meetings with the divisions, the departments, and the officials could be a part of the special meetings that we have. But are there any other recommendations related to reasons that we could have special meetings?
Yes, I spoke to Alderwoman Velasquez, who, getting her input, and she is co-chairing the Red Tape Committee at the Board of Aldermen. And she asked that we cooperate, or we could hold a joint meeting, and I said I would bring it up during this session. So,
Would we get
and they are
clarification
covering,
about what the red tape
they're covering a number of items. I'll send it to everybody on the committee. The, how they can streamline city government. They've tapped a number of groups nationwide and have developed a series of papers, or received a series of papers on how other cities have streamlined government to make it more effective.
Do we know the bounds of their work, the purpose of that group at the time that this commission has been formed by the city?
It's a committee at the Board of Aldermen.
Right, but why would they form that committee now, given the fact that the city just voted for this commission to take place? What are the bounds of their work versus our work?
So.
I think it,
I'm sorry, so the formation of that red tape committee was based upon the fact of current, like, processes and procedures within city government that are gummed up due to various forms of bureaucracy. Whereas this is formed for the general charter, that particular commission or that particular committee of the Board of Aldermen is really focused on such things as like, okay, like the big thing right now is of course the liquor licensing or whatever. So it's very specific as to, hey, let's kind of move this process along.
with ordinances.
With ordinance, yeah, ordinances, things like that.
I believe I mentioned at the last meeting too that I suggested that we would benefit from some demographic information about the city in terms of, where we are and certainly where we might be going because, we're looking at something that, recommendations that are really for the next decade at this point. I, for one, don't know enough about the details beyond just what I see in the newspaper. But there's some very good people out there that do know a lot more, and that could be something that in a Zoom call or whatever orientation could be useful and then could be retained afterward for public consumption.
What kind of meetings would those be specifically?
Well, I would suggest that we do maybe a 45-minute orientation with a man by the name of Onesimo Sandoval, who's the head of the demographics unit at St. Louis University, and who's done a lot of really good numbers crunching at this point about, not just, the overall number of residents in St. Louis, but what does that population really look like? And we could, in fact, even ask him specific questions like, so that you have the information to provide, income levels. So what are we talking about in terms of income levels, families, sizes of families? They've got the information drilled down into blocks from that point of view if we wanted that detailed, but I would assume we don't. But really, what are we talking about in terms of St. Louis today? And where is it going? Because they've got enough information from the last decade to be able to, in fact, see trends and be able to project off the trends in terms of where we're going.
So are we talking a meeting related to research as a whole or two separate meetings related to numerical research versus experimental or experiential research?
I'm thinking of one.
Okay.
And I'm thinking simply about the numbers themselves, and clearly what we would want to do with that information might lead to another meeting, but that it's really getting out some standard information so that we all start from the same point as we move forward. I guess that's what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Do we have any other recommendations for types of meetings that we would have?
Can I make a proposal based off what people have suggested? Like a possible structure for it?
Possible.
Possible. So it sounds like there's a variety of needs for us to get grounded on a variety of facts, whether that's hearing from departments and getting sort of information on that, or demographics, or what the charter is even gives us the power over versus ordinance versus state constitution. So I wonder if there's there are 3 phases to the work. Like at next week's meeting, work groups are set up or not next week, next month's meeting, work groups are set up and they can start moving on that. But there's almost a like grounding period that needs to happen. Then the actual like work group action and
Yes.
expertise in the different areas, starting to bubble things up, get clear on it, and then get clear on what those are, what the recommendations are, and then a final period that's like, we get clear on what our slate is that we're putting forward and do our due diligence.
Groups being a form of special meeting.
Yes, a work group's being a form of special meetings. And so, yeah, like this is specifically around special meetings because like if our first phase is around like getting ourselves started, then that is like special meetings that are needed around work groups, special meetings if they are needed around like getting us grounded, if there is something with department heads or other special presentations that we might need. I'm just trying to propose a structure for how we could move.
Added work groups. I think what I've written down, special meeting concepts, the meetings with divisions, meetings with departments, meetings with officials, meetings for research, and meetings for work groups. Any other types? I think we need a special meeting for legal aspects. I think it's kind of easy to get into demographic information or neighborhood discussion and debates and things like this, but there's not enough legal representation related to these types of discussions that I think needs to be included. So I would recommend a legal special meeting that we have over the course of this time that would produce different kinds of legal professionals that would give us insight on the crafting of these city charter amendments and how they may affect or not affect the legal ramifications that happen after we do this. Because I think the city council is who enforces this city charter after we've made these amendments. So I think having some input on how it affects the legal process for the city is also important.
Well, I think I heard it said in response to some of my questions about the charter and the stuff in it at this point that clearly was not accurate anymore, that the city is not necessarily following its charter now. And so that then becomes, you know.
Is that true or is that opinion?
It's a question that I have because I've asked whether there are additional actions at this point that amended the charter that aren't in here, and I haven't heard that there are, right?
So you have a complete copy of the charter, but in me saying you have a complete copy of the charter, I in no way meant to represent that we're not following the charter.
Well,
That is, it was not my intention to so state. So
Well, it's,
my apologies if I
Yeah.
was unclear. And just for the couple of things that we had a similar discussion at the last meeting, and in my correspondence on the 5th, I note that Dr. Sandoval said that he is available to present at your October 4th meeting, and Christine Ingracia and Casey Milberg are available to present a city-county overview if you choose to have those presentations.
I'd like to see us have overviews and not bring in department heads at this point, so we can quickly get grounded. Want us to be thorough, but also efficient.
Agreed.
And that could be a special meeting so that we can publicly work through work groups and vote on those at our October meeting.
well, and I wonder whether we should do the demographic information by Zoom, just so that we don't make that October meeting so lengthy at this point that we can't get to the other agenda items. But
I think that's also a part of this conversation is what is reserved for the special meetings versus what we're conducting in the public meeting. So the special meetings is what we're discussing now that happens in addition to our public meetings. So these other subject matters happen in addition to the public meetings that we have. So we might need to order what we want our public meetings to address. Well, no, we don't. Because the special meetings have already been identified, unless we need to put the special meeting I would say, subject matters up for a motion or a vote? Or do we leave that open so that we can continue to add subject matters to the special meetings area?
I would say we don't know what special meetings we should have yet. Other than I think Commissioner Crossland suggested we have a special meeting to get a demographics presentation. Which,
There are others you listed. What were
Yeah,
they?
the others we
Go through your list.
listed, we have divisions, departments, and officials for the city that commissioners want to hear from.
and that's different than the presentation we were offered for the October meeting?
Yes, that would be conducted at a public meeting, right?
However you all decide, is your
No,
intent.
no, no, yeah.
Could I,
Yeah, so it could be a special meeting.
It could happen
Yeah, I
before
guess it
that.
could
could I ask a clarifying question? As part of the determining the special meetings, is this like filling our schedule for the rest of the year? Like, is that part of the aim with?
I
passing a
think
motion on
that
it, or-
I'm in alignment with the commissioner down here related to timelining and benchmarking. I think I'm trying to get closer to what the timeline looks like and what we need to be achieving by specific dates and benchmarks. And outlining some of these things would help us get there versus it being May and we still don't have the required amendments in place to meet the August deadline.
Well, and that's why I'm suggesting that some of, as much of this as we could do, that is simply orientation or updating in advance of that meeting, the better off we might be at this point, because I am concerned that if we wait on all of this until October, that just pushes us another month back.
Okay, well, I'd like to make a motion that we have 2 special meetings between now and our October meeting. One where Casey Milberg and Christine Ingracia give us an overview of St. Louis City. And the second where the professor from St. Louis U gives us an overview of demographics. And I would recommend that both of them be done over Zoom.
Could that be amended to one meeting? Need to be two.
Probably two.
I think it would be 2, quite frankly, yeah.
Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Can I just ask clarification? You listed a couple others. I
I
know there
did.
was like legal, but there was other ones that you were, I just want to make sure what were.
The special meetings that I wrote down were legal, the work groups, the research, officials, departments, and divisions. All of those subsets of discussion be organized for special meeting. That's what I recommend, but I can't put a motion for.
I'll renew my second to the motions on the table.
We can amend the motion, I believe.
Or we can
Or
pass that
discussion.
motion and then look at what other options we'd like to add to it.
What are we recommending? Wait, was
That
that
one on the
seconded?
table, I second
It
this
was,
motion.
it was seconded, so we have to
There can be,
vote.
there can be discussion, there can be
We either have
discussion,
to
right, on the motion.
defeat it and go back, or we pass this one and then add.
Or there can be discussion, right,
Correct.
on the motion.
So what would
So-
we like to do, Mr. Roberts?
Well, it sounds like there is a discussion. So the motion is on the table that, about having the special meetings. So is there any discussion that you would ask for open?
Is there
discussion?
any discussion on the motion that has been seconded on the floor?
So the purpose of fast tracking these 2 is to give us the context, these 2 out of the other possible things for the special meetings, is so that we have the context such that we can categorize work groups and get to that work following October 1st.
Yes.
And
I think the testimony of the department heads will be the purview of a work group as opposed to the entire body.
And to clarify, we would, all of these are special meetings, but we would make them available to the public so that they would be able to listen in also, or?
Have to be.
Yes, no closed meeting.
Yes. So they're not closed meetings, they are just
Correct.
special meetings.
They're special meetings.
I wanted to clarify that for the public.
I think the other clarifying question or discussion was that there are other special meeting buckets in addition to the 2 that are in the motion. So would we like to add those additional areas, or we want to have a second
I
motion?
mean, I I have no further discussion. I don't need to add.
Okay, go ahead.
I think, as the person who put in the motion, I would ask that we vote specifically on that motion before we do anything else.
Okay.
So,
For those opposed to the motion on the floor, please respond with yes or yes.
For those in support, say aye.
Do you support, for those that are in support of the motion on the floor, please respond with yes.
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 For those opposed to the motion on the floor, please respond with no.
No.
Are you opposed?
Yes.
Okay, so how many do we have opposed versus,
Can we do a raise of hands? Because it's hard to.
okay, I agree.
I think it's six
Or
to
do a
two.
roll call.
6 to 2,
Okay.
which
It
passes.
still passes.
It passes with 6 yeses and 2 nos. And I agree with being able to see the table. Okay, did you want to continue with discussion on the next matter, or, I'm talking to you, Commissioner? Okay. So we'll move forward with, there's nothing to move forward with. There's
Well,
nothing
the
to
only
move.
question that I have is that we did have a discussion there about additional special meetings, and do we want to table that, or do we want to actually continue with that discussion right now?
I think what we discussed was that we're gonna conduct these 2 special meetings in order to move forward through the October agenda, and then discuss the other needs for additional special meetings. Was that what you were recommending?
There's no pending motion for
Okay.
additional meetings.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
I guess I'd,
Could we recognize the lady out there? She's had her hand up for a long time.
Okay.
Well, we,
In the spirit of your vote, we have public input. So I apologize because there wasn't a designated space for this meeting. I'm Kathleen Farrell, leader of the League of Women Voters of the city. I want to make a couple of very quick comments about process. Number one, and you started to address this, but nothing looks settled to me. What are open meetings? How will they be announced in a timely manner? So that people know what the subject is, what the agenda is. I'm also very concerned about what I hear about, we will get legal advice as we go along about what we can change and what we can't and how we will do it. I say that because at the beginning of this meeting, you immediately closed the meeting for the Sunshine Law discussion and presentation. One can say that was appropriate or not appropriate. I've been in various state jurisdictions where it is closed and where it isn't closed, but that was your decision. But I think you need to figure that out because I can see this as being a real mess and very badly perceived by the public. That when you get into one of these, and it is going to be very sensitive, when you start getting into some of this stuff and you say, oh, we need legal advice about how we can proceed. And then because it is legal advice, if the Sunshine Law was legal advice, certainly what you have to change about the mayor's office or the Board of Aldermen or the Board of Estimates is also legal advice. How are you going to handle that? Because I can see that as being, as a person who's not ignorant about these things, okay? But I also don't have a PhD in political science, so I don't want to be labeled as an academic, just, you know. I think you need to think about that. Because I can see that as, 15 minutes, okay, now we've got to have closed legal advice about this. And I think that is, I think you need to figure that out, okay? That's a process question. And I think you need to appear, appearances as much as anything else. Work this out so that it's smooth, so that there are no rumors about this being a cooked process, et cetera, okay? Finally, I think that, and as you said, as you get into the buckets, have meetings around a particular topic. People don't want to listen to all this stuff. But if you were gonna say, let's have a city manager, or let's change the board of estimates or something like that, yeah, people would come out. So think about that as you orchestrate these working groups. Because if you really want people's input, they've got to know that you're going to talk about something hot like that at a working group meeting. And you need to coordinate your public meetings with that. I will simply say that the league is going to produce a report from every meeting that we attend, and we're going to try to attend all of your meetings, working groups and the whole 9 yards and special meetings. We're going to distribute them to neighborhood associations so that people start to get engaged. Okay? So that's all I wanted to say. This is out of respect to this process. We want to help get the community to participate in it. Those are our comments from just watching this process. Okay?
Have any feedback or discussion related to what's being brought to us right now?
Just to clarify in one space, like the 15 minutes is not like a ceiling, that was a floor. You know, in terms of like ensuring that there's some base of it for everyone, which I know. I just want, you know, you said opportunity to clarify.
Yeah.
So that part. I do think, like, to explain my nay on that motion, I do think that rushing 2 additional meetings between now and the October one, like, this is information that a lot of the public needs about the process. And then I think the one other thing is when it comes to like creating really solid community engaged processes, sometimes we put form before function, and that can be really hard for community to follow. And it felt like kind of this breaking out of the 3 areas with a little like form going before function, which was, I probably didn't say it well, but my, you know, suggestion around like, okay, what are the, like, how are we trying to structure our time? Or that somebody said like, what are the deadlines that we have to hit or timelines? I think could help to create a really like community engaged process, because we thought through like how we want to structure it and then how to set up special meetings or other things to.
I think it's also important to convey that we are designing this process. We are designing everything related to the commission from scratch. This is first of its kind to my information, to my knowledge. So all of this related to process has to be created.
Yeah, and that was the reason I give the input today rather than October.
Correct. So we are creating it. We are working towards making sure that the process that we work in and what is delivered to the public is effective and that it's efficient and productive. In addition to that, progressive towards the deadline that we have to meet. And I think that some of the discussion that we're having has to happen in order for us to be able to even determine what would be discussed on meetings so that we can engage the public as it relates to communication, which is why engagement was on the agenda for today. But I do agree with my fellow commissioner that we will start formulating what the meetings will look like for the community to participate in. But some of it is not going to be, for lack of a better word, sexy to navigate because we have to create this process. And I want to make sure that we're spending enough time doing that as well as discussing the issues.
But to be fair, and every public notice is our agenda.
Yes.
What we discussed today, we discussed last week, was notified to the public
And we have
24 hours in advance, so that has been done. It may not be sexy, but it is out there, was discussed.
I'm gonna say, I know that you have voted to have a couple more meetings, and we will do everything in our power to get you who you want. But we did ask those folks if they were available on October the 4th. So do you want to talk about a contingency if we are not able to produce those people for 2 additional meetings between now and then?
Okay. I think from last week's meeting, the consensus was where most of us are available around this time on Wednesdays. I want to see if we're available on this time on Wednesdays weekly, or have we all just kind of freed up our schedule for that first of the month as an additional date for meetings, for special meetings?
Unfortunately,
At the meetings, if people are not gonna be able to show up for everyone or attend virtually. It's just, that's. At the meeting.
And to be fair, I mean, those meetings are going to be presented, they're gonna be recorded. Not every commissioner needs to be there, you know, I don't think we're gonna vote on the city structure as it's presented to us. But you are going to want to, of course, follow open meeting laws and all that. But you'll be able to participate in it or not. We're gonna get a presentation, we'll ask questions, it'll be recorded. People will have all the access in the world to watch it, including commissioners who can't attend that night.
So to account for a contingency strategy, is it that we're saying, because I just want to be clear, are we saying that those who maybe can't make it to certain times and dates will have to catch up via the recorded live
I
stream?
think the issue on the floor is that all the division departments or elected officials may not be able to make our set meeting date for the public meetings. So what additional days or times are we available for accommodating
Well, no,
those individuals?
I think what she's saying is they've already committed to our October meeting date.
Correct.
Now, we've moved the date without asking them. So I think the contingency is that we'll just have to move their testimony to the October meeting date if they can't
Can
come
we
earlier.
clarify?
So yes, we did ask them for their availability on October 4th, and with the assumption that they would have between now and October 4th to prepare, to present to you. So maybe maybe you guys want to have a contingency in case we cannot produce 2 meetings between now and October 4th on those topics. Maybe there's another topic or some other, maybe we have some options in case these folks maybe aren't ready next Wednesday to present.
Have we decided what topics what topics they would be presenting on that they may not be ready for?
So I believe the motion was for the City County Overview by Christine Ingracia and Casey Milberg, who I know is not in town right now. And then the second one was for Dr. Sandoval from St. Louis U to present on demographics. Have I stated your motion correctly, sir?
he's probably the most likely to be ready sooner because I know he's got a lot of this data already and it's just a question of putting together a deck.
Okay.
Whether, he may not need the whole month is what I'm saying. And so, even if, the one presentation has to be done on the 4th because they're not ready earlier, maybe we can get the one in beforehand to be able to, speed up the process.
I'm gonna go on record and just say that I think we're kind of being a little bit inconsiderate to the meeting time. If they already agreed to October 4th, then I think that we should honor their commitment to that as opposed to trying to rush, because I now have to definitely agree with Commissioner Dwight here, is that rushing to do this makes us seem very unorganized and unprepared, and we're trying to rush to get something done, and then the optics of that, as our citizen here just pointed out, when we rush to do something, it makes us look we're incompetent.
So can I speak to the incompetence and the rushing? So in clear, just for clarity's sake, if I'm in a capacity and I'm doing something that I'm doing on a regular basis and I have access to this information as she stated, it's not something I need to prepare for over a course of 30 days. If I have the availability to present that in a different time frame or date or earlier or sooner, that wouldn't be an issue for me in a professional space if that is what I'm doing on a regular basis. I understand preparation and I understand preparing for a presentation, but I also understand timelines, benchmarks, and deadlines. And so more of what the commissioners are speaking on this side of the table is what information do we need prior to the October meeting in order to progress what it is that we're doing forward. I don't think that it's rushing. I don't think that it's inconsiderate, but I do think that we can consider the fact that they've already agreed to the October meeting and maybe use our special meetings in a different way, which is what I was getting to when I was saying we have more areas for special meetings. But for the sake of these two, we can open the floor to the two professionals we want to speak to. If they can meet prior to that, I think it's fine. If they can't, I also think it's fine that we wait until the October meeting for them to present. But we have the motion for them to be special meetings.
I also wonder, because I've gotten a couple comments already from people in the community when I've said monthly meetings and this kind of a thing, and there's a feeling that we lack a sense of urgency about some of this. And so it may be that our moving forward and doing some of this stuff already may appear to the community to be more action-oriented than our just sitting here and waiting for monthly meetings. So I think we can view it both ways. You know, it's not, some people may think it's a rush. Other people may say, oh, they're getting to work. Good job.
I'll also add to that we're looking at 26 articles and we're looking at 100 years worth of work that we have to do in a 10-month period. And that's why I was encouraging us to read the articles over this past week so that we can understand the undertaking. So this is not something we're going to be able to do, you know, with our hands tied behind our back and just wait for the time to somehow surpass. So we do have to be strategic in how we're approaching the work that is required of us. So it may seem like it's deadlined and it's timelined and it's all of that as we progress, but it's necessary for some of that to be in play so that we're not coming up against crunches in May and April.
So that for my question becomes, I think we should state for the record how our notices are published. And I think we may commit to more than 24 hours notice for the public.
Agreed.
Information is available sooner, great. If not, we can wait. Public will have 3 days, a week to prepare. And they know that we're going to be meeting. I don't know the official means of publication, but that means just to state for the record for those who don't know the way that those meetings are published.
We discuss what's on the agenda here, and we present what we want to add to the agenda in these meetings. So for the sake of notifying the public of what we're going to discuss month to month, we can present that to Secretary Bobo so that we can get it to the city officials that are required to publish it on the website where our information is related to these meetings.
So the website is where someone needs to go to find out what we're doing. That's the only way we publish our
Are we
notices.
putting the agenda on the commission's website page for the city?
Yes, it is on the city's calendar, it's on the commission's page, and it is posted on the bulletin board in this building and in City Hall.
Is that standard? We have other ways to get information out? Are we limited to those 3 means, or that is a standard?
You can decide to do it a different way.
Understood.
You have that flexibility for sure.
If there are other ways to get information out, I would suggest we consider that and giving more than just 24 hours notice.
It'd be great to like source a list of community partners or something that we always send a email or notice out to.
We didn't get, that's something I wanted to recommend we add to next month's agenda is the marketing communications approach. It's a part of the engagement, but not so much. The next agenda, I was recommending that we have marketing and communication on it so we can discuss what distribution looks like, because I'm not sure whom in the city is going to be tasked with our marketing efforts or our communication efforts. But I think that we have to determine and discuss what that looks like, along with items like the budget for the commission and a layer of other different things in the October meeting. The city councilor's office and everybody that's been assigned to us non-voting members weren't expecting us to schedule our next meeting for the following week from last week, right? So in this time frame from now until October, we have some time to prepare what that agenda would look like. And the city council's office has a standard process on distributing that for the public. But if we want additional ways of distributing the agenda, we have to discuss it in this forum. Do we have any other discussion on the community input that we received, or anything else that we've discussed, or the agenda for the October meeting?
If we've moved presentations that were going to be at the October meeting up further, could there be a larger amount of time open at October meeting for some community input around the charter? Things that could inform the decision that we make on categories and how we structure our approach? Does anybody think that's a good idea, first of all?
So just to clarify, you're saying specific feedback on the working groups, or just general feedback on anything related to the charter?
On the most important themes or topics for us to look at in the charter.
Maybe we would want to try to structure it a little bit, bucket it with the buckets. Because I think that if we make it really free form, it could be all over there, because I don't know about you, but till I read the whole charter, I didn't really know what the heck was in it. So we don't want a lot of people talking about things that aren't part of the charter anyway. And so maybe going back to Commissioner Riley's proposed three buckets and suggesting then that people make comments around those three buckets or something might be a way to help focus them a bit.
Over this past week, I drafted some meeting agendas for the public meetings and for the public hearings. And that may help solve this discussion that we're having. I drafted some slips. And I drafted the amendment document. I would hope that the public meeting, the public hearing, and then the draft, I believe I drafted for everyone this past week, so that we can have some basis of how we're approaching, so that the public could have an idea of what would be discussed. But it's simply a draft, and it's definitely up for discussion or recommendation. But it's just so that we have a framework. Do we have extras?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Commissioner DeWitt.
I do really appreciate like creating drafts to test it out. In my experiences, like with previous ones, I don't know if like the setup of like kind of going article by article will necessarily be the best for, or the most like community friendly for engaging around it. But I appreciate the creation of drafts around it.
So with the idea of theming the public meetings, if we went with the bucket route and we themed the public meetings around that bucket until that bucket of articles was drafted in its initial form, would that be appropriate? So for example, for that first 3 meetings, if we went with the bucket approach after we see the organizational structure aspects, if we craft or themed that set of meetings for that bucket versus having the articles presented and communicated and discussed individually, the way that it's listed.
The only
think-
thing is, doesn't the, I'm trying to remember the wording about the at least two public hearings, one at the beginning and one at the end to synopsize. I believe there was something about synopsizing sort of our work to present it to the constituents. And I guess if we do the 1, 2, 3, then will 3 include a synopsis of 1 and 2, or how would we go about doing that?
So I also drafted some timelines and benchmarks. And so we could discuss those as well on what, to your point, what would be discussed in the timeline approach and what information they would get. So I think in order for us to start on our own time, looking at what we would communicate during the timeline or during each public meeting or public hearing, based on a theme of the bucket, we needed to see kind of what time we're looking at. And that's why I want to say Thursday of last week, created what would look like in a year at a glance of what we would be doing or what would be presented. I didn't want to email it because it's a bit.
I talked a lot. I really appreciate you making a document like this. I think having a process document like this and then talking through using the specifics within the framework could have been helpful. And yeah, could create that structure that would be helpful to get towards a final timeline.
So to Commissioner Crossan's earlier question, I think that having the themes of buckets will help us to market the meetings. The Board of Aldermen's role, I mean, people know what that means as opposed to having read through the articles. I also think that I'm hearing, and I appreciate this because this helps me to kind of think through when we need to have deadlines to kind of back into these groups and all that, because I'm hearing at least 3 public hearings on the front end, possibly 1 for each bucket, and then 3 on the back end once amendments have been proposed, to hear feedback, for us to hear feedback on each of those 3 buckets, and then finalize.
See, that's what I was getting to. It's not just 3, then it has to be more to be able to make it work.
And this, what I'm giving to you guys, is just my brain dump over this past week on what I was contemplating could potentially happen based on just workflows and operational concepts and things. And I think us knowing where we're going in a process helps us to market the communication of what will be discussed.
And Chairman, this is extremely helpful. I would highly recommend that we come back with, or in the interim, make some suggestions to the schedule. This is great. And I think it will also help us as a commission if we kind of know what we're going to talk about in advance of the meeting on something like this. So this is fantastic work and appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I know the dates that we're meeting too. Thank you.
That's in your calendar, your Google. Okay,
Speaking of dates, do you want to pick dates for your 2 interim meetings, or do you want us to just try to schedule them on Wednesday evenings?
we oppose. So do you all want to have special meetings or additional meetings on this time throughout different weeks? Or do we want to open our schedule to different options? Or do we want to stick with the structure forum of Wednesdays after 4:30 if we need to meet related to special meetings, public hearings, and public meetings? So that's open for discussion for all of us to give our input on how we want to navigate meeting times and days.
And I'm specifically referencing your motion and the 2 meetings that you want to have between now and October.
Well, I wonder whether, since they would be doing us a courtesy to move them up, that we should ask them what makes sense. You know, and that we then make our best efforts to attend the event, the time that they set up. If that's not good for us, then maybe we have to go back to doing it on October the 4th. But I'm not sure that we should set another date ourselves for them that's a shorter time frame and then say, oh, can you do it by?
I agree with that.
So ask them, see if we have quorum, and then set the
Right.
date.
Okay.
So can we, is that okay?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay. Do we have any other discussion as a commission related to the agenda items, the final items? I know that everything that was passed out recently is not something we could spend another probably 2 hours discussing, but it's something that I would recommend us looking over on our own time. The agenda that came up as a reference, if we could prioritize any amendments you would like to make to the existing draft agenda before we end this meeting, so that the public has a recurring meeting agenda that they can reference.
And what's the
So the one time-
draft agenda?
Yeah, where's that?
So we have a public hearing draft, and then it should be a public meeting. Probably. Okay, so the one, I think they're both printed off wrong, or it's two of the same. This looks like the public hearing meeting agenda. So what I'll email is the public meeting agenda that I drafted to everyone. And you all can let me know if there's any amendments, and I will provide that to Secretary Bobo for review with the city councilors for distribution. But it looks pretty similar to the public hearing that the city council's office printed out for me, put on letterhead. I think there was
One thing I want to clarify.
fusion with what's happening.
But when we say public hearing in here, these are the group hearings as opposed to the time that we set aside in different meetings for the public to comment.
Yes.
Is that also referred to as a public hearing then, when they comment as part of the monthly meetings, or is that just public comment that we take at a meeting?
I would probably refer to it as public comment.
Okay, that makes it a little clearer in my mind then, thank you.
So we did not get to, I don't have the public meeting draft that I sent up here for everyone to see, but I can send that via email to everybody, correct? Okay. I'll send that to everyone via email, the public meeting draft. You have the public hearing draft. So I'll send the public meeting draft to you via email. If there's amendments that we would like to make, if we could make those via email so that I can get them to the city council's office, so we can always have an agenda present for the citizens.
I guess I would, when structuring like those public hearings and forums, I would really suggest that it might look different for different ones based on what it's about, what we're particularly looking for at community members at that stage, to make sure that their input that they're giving is timely to where we are in the process. It might be that we want to engage facilitators to support us in administering those meetings, to like get it well. So I just want to offer that it doesn't always have to be in a like very traditional hearing format.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a really difficult way to get community input that's meaningful for what we want.
So I think that we would have additions to our agenda monthly as the work goes on and we determine what needs to be discussed at those meetings. But the issue on the floor is that we convey it in a far enough time, more than the 24-hour notice that we're required to do. So in order to do the 2-week notice that's on the floor, how would we recommend making sure that the public has notice of the meeting agenda 2 weeks in advance?
Well, and that we'd be very cognizant of the opportunity that is presented by having multiple meetings, that we spread them around, but that they be very accessible, and that the setup of the room is going to be very important if we really want to elicit conversations and comments.
And to maybe get a list of institutional partners that would sign on to distributing them with that 2 weeks. I
So
think
are we
there'd be a
saying
lot of
we
community groups.
determine the agenda in these meetings? Because I think what we're missing is that the agenda has to be created and distributed. So how do we recommend creating and distributing the agenda for these meetings?
For hearings?
I believe, because every meeting we have to have an agenda to the public. So we do need to determine what that looks like.
For the next meeting.
Yes.
Right, only the next meeting.
Mm-hmm. So we can go back to, I can email you all the draft of what the city councilor's office gave me related to the meeting agendas that we've been following the past 2 meetings. And then we can make amendments to that meeting for October. And the city councilor's office can distribute it as they have so far.
Because as long as
Awesome.
we've got 10 days or 2 weeks to be able to do that, and we can still meet our 2-week deadline.
And so essentially we vote via email as to what the final agenda will be, or how, I'm just.
I don't
We don't
think
have to
that's
vote on it.
necessary. I think the chair and the vice chair can
Set the
make
agenda.
decisions on setting agenda.
What the commission would do is if you have something you want on the agenda, you communicate that you want it added to the agenda, and we'd edit it.
Okay. And so just for clarification, because there's been so much talk about special meetings, and then I guess we're reversing the special meetings, what have we agreed will actually be on the agenda for October 4th right now?
Nothing other than the presentations from
That's
those
right,
2
okay.
departments.
Just a demographic presentation.
So we need to determine what else we want on the October
gotcha.
agenda.
So you're going to prepare a draft and submit it to us, and we're then going to add anything that we can suggest also, and then that draft is going to be distributed at least 2 weeks in advance of October the 6th.
Yes.
And so certainly on the agenda as well, though, we have this, I'll call it the David work group idea. Is that going to be on the agenda on October 4th? Like we are formalizing?
We can add it.
a work. Okay.
Right, so we all agree with that. It
That's
will
right,
be-
I just-
We will finalize work groups on October 4th, okay.
Right.
Great.
And so you're.
And will
just-
we then also, and this timeline is very helpful, will we be formalizing a
Yes.
timeline?
I'll-
That's part of the, okay.
I will add formalizing
Yeah.
the timeline.
Whatever, and that is subject, I know we're gonna be talking about work groups, but we will be coming up with essentially a public hearing process. Okay.
And will we be deciding between the 2 approaches to the work groups, the one being the buckets with people who have interest or experience going into being assigned to certain categories, or the idea that we just divide up the articles and arbitrarily assign commissioners to it?
Yes, because the October meeting, we're supposed to get the departments and divisions additional
Okay.
information
That
requested.
would be toward the conclusion of that meeting, we would.
So that'll be another agenda item then.
Okay, and I would just ask too, so I think there's been a great discussion about how fast we go versus how deliberate we are versus the information we need to gather, and I am not sure of that, but what I am worried about is we get into the meeting on October 4th and think like, here's something more we need to know before we decide the work groups.
I agree.
am confident that things, for instance, we talked about legal information, that we do not need an update. on October 4th for that. That is something we can, the work groups can go through, but did I understand that there
You
were any
understood
other
correctly.
things that we need to have presentations on?
We don't have
At
to have
October 4th,
presentations on the special meeting areas on October 4th. Those are just areas for over the year. If we need to bucket conversation into those areas, that we can.
So we feel like we will, by that, into that October 4th meeting, we will have the information necessary to develop the work groups.
Which means that I believe by the December meeting, we should be able to start working on the actual articles. Okay.
The November.
November, I'm sorry. I went right into December, I'm sorry.
One more
Okay.
point of clarification, it was alluded to earlier, I want to confirm that the special meetings would be via Zoom. I heard someone say that, or are we meeting again in person and live streaming those special presentations if we can schedule them in advance of October?
So my understanding, the special meetings will be conducted via Zoom.
If they are available prior to October 4th,
Correct.
then they'll be by Zoom. If they can't do it early, then they'll come to the October 4th meeting. That's my understanding.
Any other discussion or questions? Comments, concerns? Okay. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. All in favor of adjournment, please signify with an A or yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I just want to make sure I have everything.